So here we are in Porto, Portugal. It's been a year and 4 months since our last Partycrashers on the road. The last one was the Christmas special, recorded in Newcastle, England. The last one that we did was actually also in this neighbourhood, down the road in Vila de Conde, at the Queirós Festival of Shorts. And this one is Porto PostDoc, which is, I think, the 4th edition. It's your first time here, it's my first time here. What would you describe as the kind of guiding principle of the festival? What does it mean to be PostDoc as this festival interprets that?
Don't know. Next question. I hadn't, to be honest, until you mentioned the notion of like a postdoc being a thing. I hadn't really thought of it. I just thought I hadn't really interrogated the title or name of the festival in any way. And so I was like, oh yeah, is postdoc a thing? Like, is it?
Like post-punk, post-hardcore?
Right, because I like Porto postdoc, as I said, I didn't really know what was meant by it. So to answer your question, I guess like something that is beyond or after the traditional definition of a documentary. So we're moving into sort of hybrid non-fiction, what I would refer to as such, or creative non-fiction, for want of a better term. So primarily the films that we've watched this week are debatable in terms of the documentary credentials or status as such. Like the best new film I've seen this week was Once There Was Brasilia by Adirley, the Brazilian filmmaker.
Was that the first film you saw?
It's the best film I've saw this week. It was the second film I've seen at the festival. The first one was Meteors by Gürcan Keltek.
Yes.
Which again isn't a traditional documentary per se, right? And so there's been a lot of, I mean, Once There Was Brasilia is like a fictional film, right? It's dramatized, it's science fiction, it's set in the past, but also has kind of topical relevance with regard to Brazilian politics and the current landscape, both geographical, urban, and political in Brazil.
I haven't seen the film. I understand it's some degree like science fiction.
Yeah. So like,
what's the plot?
Don't ask me to synopsize it. Because it's
post synopsis.
The point is that it's about a disparate group of people in Brasilia, in a city on the outskirts of Brasilia, who eventually come together and attempt, I think, to assassinate the president, or decide to.
And this is the real president, or it's a fictional?
Yeah, the real president. So we get like through sound bites, Brazil's various snippets of false promises and hope that's been given to Brazil over the years. I think it might also, forgive me in advance here, but I don't know if this is correct, but I was told later on, my knowledge of Brazilian politics is very limited. But I think it's also past politicians and past presidents as well.
Right. So it's like a composite of presidents.
And they're fed up. They've been, kind of displaced geographically to the margins, and then they come together to, as I said, attempt some kind of political action. But the interesting thing is that the methodology behind the film is very non-fictional. So like very documentarian in approach. There's scenes where, there's the cast is seen, for instance, on the metro platforms, and like there's people who aren't aware of the film being made, and they're just like looking at the camera like, like something from a Lumiere.
So it's not like a long lens thing where they just...
No, it's not. They're very much like, but it's a very composed film. It's not like ad hoc on the fly. It's very much like, it's been artistically composed. I found it very, very compelling. But that's kind of, for me, emblematic of what we might be referring to when we say post-doc.
Because looking at the programme, there are films such as The Beguiled by Sofia Coppola and Lucky of John Carroll Lynch, which are not they're not in any way documentary. I mean, they are documentaries of their own shoot.
Yeah.
Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell and Fanning were all together in that room, and this camera captured them in that room. But on that basis, like, everything's a documentary.
So I took like the inclusion of films like that to be like almost just, and I quite like it actually, just like this is what the festival is called, this is what the festival is, but in addition to that, it's an opportunity to programme you know, just features, straightforward features in the sense.
120 BPM by Robin Campillo.
That's another one. And the Beguiled hasn't been released in Portugal.
Yeah, it is, I think, the only chance to see the film on the big screen.
So, you know, why not? I do think that's kind of a valid, legitimate programming
but by
decision.
Including the word doc in the title of the festival, maybe we interpret that as documentary.
Yeah, which is a term that I have increasing difficulty with anyway. Like, you know, there's doc d'espoir as well.
But we can say it's postdoctorate, you know, post.
In the context of a film festival, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that doc is documentary.
Right. Yeah.
But like,
it just seems to me to put an unnecessary hurdle in the way of appreciating the films, because it's like, it's as if to say you can't just have a film festival. It's got like, but why bring documentary into it? Because it's like, you know, isn't film just film? And if you just say it's the Porto Film Festival, is that somehow like old-fashioned? You can't just have a film festival anymore.
Might be deemed to funders and sponsors alike to be old-fashioned. Whether or not that it should be old-fashioned, I don't know. But you know, here we are. So,
but also the festival has lots of music elements and visual media elements and performance elements and stuff like that. And also the film, you know, take film out of the title, but I just think to kind of insert doc in there, it sort of ties it in. I mean, I've been using the term documentary oriented when I've been sort of describing certain festivals.
Remind me what the D in FID Marseille stands for.
I think it now FID Marseille is Festival International du Cinéma. But it used to be Festival International Documentaire.
Yeah, because you know, Jean-Pierre, the director of that festival, is very against the idea of that festival being known as a documentary festival. So I think you're right to say documentary.
Historically, that's been seen as a bit of a ghetto.
Yeah.
You know, but then again, you get like IDFA, which just finished, which is International Documentary Festival Amsterdam, and it seems, you know, the old thing about what is a documentary, what isn't a documentary. We're going back to Flaherty, Nanook of the North, and Man of Aaron. You know, these are questions that have been raging for 85 years in cinema, or 90 years in cinema.
But correct me if I'm wrong in thinking that if I was to attend, I've never been to IDFA, but if I was to attend that whole festival, at the very end of it, I would come out and I'd have seen a lot of films that would fit into the traditional remit of documentary, like issues-based, educative films.
Yes, an extension of news reporting, reportage.
A lot of films at the moment made about Syrian refugees, for instance, displaced among...
Here is a subject that you need to know more about. Here's a way to find out facts about this subject. But IDFA is a huge festival. It's, you know, hundreds of films, and there is a paradox section.
And there's an industry and market element as well.
There's an industry market element. But so there are still obviously thousands of traditional documentaries being made every year, and there are good ones and there are bad ones. You know, just because a film's a traditional documentary, a fly on the wall, or even issues-based talking heads, that's not a quality.
Which we have had an example of this week, because the way they had the Inconvenience, an Inconvenience sequel by Al Gore, featuring Al Gore.
Directed by Guggenheim, I presume, who did the first one, which was also in this section highlights. Directed by Bonnie Cohen and John Schenk, Inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power, which I haven't seen.
Yeah,
but those who did see it said it's a very straightforward, traditional talking heads. Here's an issue. At the end of it, there's probably like a website you can go visit and find out that stuff.
Which, of course, is a legitimate, you know, means of engagement, I guess, still among, you know, when we talk about film forms and, you know.
And there is an audience for that.
Engagement.
Film. There will be people who want to see that. But if you're interested in the art form of cinema, why would you go and see an Inconvenient sequel? You know, in terms of how is this art form developing, where is it going, and if artists are electing to use documentary tropes or traditions or documentary feel or something like that and go in a different way, then like festivals or events should follow that. I mean, it should always be based on what the artists are doing, I think. And if sufficient artists in the world are doing this, it's like, you know, fan footage is a thing, so you could have a whole fan footage festival, because there are thousands of artists around the world, some of them good, some of them bad, but it's an artistic movement to use fan
So a
footage.
festival is basically a showcase of current trends in its very, very fundamental sense.
I mean, it's not a big festival.
No,
I mean, in terms of the number of films that's being shown. I mean, in competition there are like 12 films, I think it is, and then there are various sidebars and other sections. But it's not like a sprawling program.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it would probably be possible if you were energetic to see everything in the program, because there's repetitions and multiplications. So on the one hand, it's very kind of close and curated, but on the other hand, it kind of sprawls a bit, and it's my first time here. I've only been here for 3 or 4 days, but to kind of get a handle on what is a Porto postdoc film, rather than here's a bunch of films which you might find interesting.
Yeah.
And there is an audience for these films, and most of the screenings have been reasonably well attended. But I'm not quite sure that there's a sort of a focus to it. Or again, am I old-fashioned in wanting a focus, or is it just enough to have, you know, Porto's a great city, lots of stuff happening here, vibrant stuff going on, and the festival is clearly ambitious and it wants to present, you know, kind of stuff that's out there. I mean, I've seen several of the films already on the circuit, so in terms of seeing new films here, I think I've seen like 5 or 6, which is not that many. And you've seen, I think, a similar kind of sampling. Yeah, and
I'd seen a lot less previously at other festivals this year.
I just came from Montreal, where there were several of these, in the RIDM festival, which is in French Rencontre Internationale Documentaire Montreal. So it's encounters with documentary,
right?
Which is again like.
Yeah. But would you agree that non-fiction, which is a term I prefer to documentary because it's a lot broader, I think, in scope.
But you never get a festival called the Non-Fiction Festival.
Would you, like the non-festival?
The non-fiction non-film.
Would you agree that that's where the more sort of dynamic, compelling stuff's being made at the moment? Because, like, you know, I look at my end-of-year lists in the last few years, and there's been an increase in, firstly, shorts, and there's been an increase in non-fiction, basically, and experimental non-fiction as well. And like, you know, the drama stuff, it just seems to interest me less these days. I don't know.
I think there are still many strong dramatic features being made, and again, there are many people with strong, interesting voices and artists who can find that as a way of expression. So it's not that I give up on those.
Yeah.
And,
no, I'm not saying
I'm not saying give up on them, but like minimise them or downplay them in favour of experimental or documentary or things like that. As a viewer, you know, I kind of like to keep on tabs on everything really. I want to know what's being seen if I go to a festival. I want to get a general overview. But yeah, when I look at my top 10, there's a lot of shorts, experimental, and documentary. I mean, experimental and documentary is a kind of weird overlap because I think there's fiction, documentary, and of course there's grey areas between all of these. But like, documentary and experimental can again be two sides of two different coins.
But I mean, you know, a film like Meteors by Gürcan Keltek, that would very much, which won the prize at this festival, the top prize. Although at the time of recording we're under embargo, but that would very much fit in an experimental film festival as well. Very comfortably.
It's like essayistic, poetic. Yeah. It has different strategies, as we would say. You know, there's some bits which are kind of based on news, others which have this poetry, and there's others which are kind of landscape, imagery, and different kind of voices.
I liked it. I mean, I'm a fan of his work in general. I like the last one, Colony. This is his first feature-length film. It's all black and white, like starkly contrasting tonal ranges. I guess.
I mean, the whole film is black and white. It's a Turkish director. A lot of the film is in the Kurdish part of Turkey, and it takes its starting point. Well, there's a war going on in these parts of Turkey, and there's also a meteor, a very spectacular meteor storm. So it's like people are used to seeing lights in the sky, and now it's the lights of these meteors. And then when they land, they discover they're actually quite valuable, so they can take them and make some money from this. So it kind of, but it approaches them from many different angles. It reminded me a little bit of Andrei Rublev, of Tarkovsky. Everything reminds me of Tarkovsky, you know what the deal is. No, but Andrei Rublev is like how many different chapters, and in each one, Tarkovsky's trying different stuff out, and some of them work and some of them don't. I mean, I think the black and white one with the naked witches is one of the best things Tarkovsky ever did. Then he tries to do like a battle sequence with the siege of the fort, and it's horrible. It's just a disaster.
But so all of Andrei Rublev's black and white, no?
No, there's the bit at the end where you see the icons. So I think in that one it was Tarkovsky, you know, trying, let's say that, and then that was very helpful to him, but the whole film is, for me, very up and down.
But it lends itself to that, I mean, Andrei Rublev, because of its episodic nature, so, I mean, like Ulysses, you know, Joyce did the same thing, like where you have a distinct unit of narrative time, I guess.
So well here it's divided into certain sections which have numbers.
And yet, nevertheless, there is a sort of coherence to it, I think.
But the section that I like is the one called Meteors, where you get lots of great kind of shitty-looking black and white footage of these. It looks like Deep Impact.
It's very pretty. I think it's zoomed in.
Yeah, it's zoomed in a bit. Yeah, I mean, it does look like some 1950s disaster movie with these giant. I've never seen meteor storms like that, but I suppose
you haven't. Oh, you haven't lived.
Well, you know, I haven't hung out in battle zones in Turkey very much. But yeah, I think in that section, I was like, if that was a short, I think that'd be one of like my favourite shorts of the year. The bits with the woman poet wandering around, kind of ruined houses, and that sort of stuff feels much more familiar. And I see a lot of films which are like that these days. So to me, that's less impressive. And overall, I found myself sort of zoning in and out over the phase of 7 minutes. But it's won here. It won in Yiklava. It seems to be, you know, getting
after premiering in Locarno.
Where I don't think it. I think it. Maybe it won, and maybe it didn't. But in terms of artistic documentaries, artistic non-fiction films that are having great success at the moment, that's certainly one of them. But like, what chance does a film like that have of getting into your local cinema?
Oh well, very slim the chances. But I mean, that's indicative of, you know, a kind of a ruined distribution system in the UK, an exhibition circuit, which is why festivals kind of have a pronounced importance and significance, I think, in general across Europe and the world.
And films like that could be described as, it's a festival film.
Yeah,
you know,
which has become this codified genre in itself, which is I think,
which is normally kind of suggesting of like, it's never a compliment to say, it's basically a festival film.
No, it's not. It's always used pejoratively. Yeah. But I think that's why I like and appreciate the freewheeling spirit of a festival like this. So you've mentioned that it's not very big, and it doesn't feel very big. I mean, like
it's short. It's like how many days? It's 7 days altogether.
Yeah. We've been out like 4 of them.
Actually, 7 days is kind of medium, I suppose, for a festival. You do get some festivals like, I think True False.
But
I
think its size is also kind of suggested or reflected by the fact that daily screenings for adults at least don't begin until at least 2:30, which is very, very common in this region, in this part of the world. So you know, you don't feel like exhausted at the end of the day, or that you've reached festival fatigue, which I think is nice. So on the one hand, it's got this like small scope comparatively, but it does also feel like it's kind of, as I said, it's created the space in which it can be freewheeling. Film is film, I guess, which I quite like.
And this is your, how many festivals have you been to this year?
This is my 14th, and to my knowledge, my final one.
Right.
But my first one wasn't until February in Berlin, and I'm not going to any others in December, so it's like 14 across 10 months.
Yeah. That's not as many as you've done in previous years.
No, I mean, it's drastically reduced.
Is that because festivals are just like running out of steam these days?
I'm just losing interest. I don't even like movies. No, it's
habit.
I mean, it's due to, you know, an increasing workload elsewhere in my life, and so I feel like I've gone to about enough festivals. I don't feel like as if I've missed out on anything this year.
So basically, like one a month, one and a bit.
That's what it's worked out as, like 1.4, I think it is, something like that. But
but that would be seen by many people as like wildly excessive and extravagant.
Well, I mean, you know, I talk to pals back home, and like London-based critics who don't get an opportunity, I guess, is to travel as much because, you know, they live in London. So firstly, they don't need to travel as much because all the films are there anyway. Secondly, they have London rents to pay, so they're not able to. And I always feel like to them, I'm perceived as like traveling a lot. But we have programming colleagues who are never off the road. And I know you still go to, like, is it 25 this year?
This will be my 23rd, yeah.
Oh, slowing down.
Well, as we get older, you know. But now I was talking to a Norwegian journalist who's quite big in documentary world and, you know, publishes a lot. And I said, how many festivals did you go to? He said, 5 or 6.
Right.
In the whole year.
But I mean, I think we're able to go to so many because we don't specialise. We kind of know nothing about films, so we're able to go to all the festivals. Whereas, like, you know, if you're pigeonholed or perceived to be a specialist in a particular kind of film, then the invitations, I guess, don't come as often, or, you know, you're not able to travel as much, maybe, I don't know. But do you feel like fatigued by travels this year?
It depends what you do when you get to the festival. If you're up till 3, 4, 5 o'clock dancing.
All right.
Dancing
don't
every
look at me
night,
when you say that.
like certain parties, then it will catch up on you, you know. And I did make a conscious decision last night. I had an early night, and I'm doing that more and more. You know, at festivals, I'm like, you just can't go to a lot of festivals and like go every day full pelt at it. But
I mean, I think I've also enjoyed festivals a lot more this year and last year, because I went to 12 last year, which basically was half of what it was in 2015. So this year, you know, I managed to do 14, which I think is pretty good considering I've got other things in my life. But
you've been to several festivals this year, which, like Porto, PostDoc, operate in this grey zone. Again, is in a sense pejorative, but this kind of like area, like they're not fiction films, they're not necessarily fiction festivals, documentary festivals. It's kind of there seems to be a thing now, like Copenhagen, CPH Docs, Fid Marseille. RAM in Montreal. It seems to be quite a strand of film festivals which is increasing, which is this particular kind of grey area, this hybrid area. So on the one hand, it's this very old debate which goes back to, as I say, the dawn of documentary.
yeah.
But on the other hand, it seems to be trendy. I mean, is that like is that a nasty way of putting it?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds a little uncharitable when you say that, because it suggests that, you know, the festival organisers are being opportunistic in creating it. But the fact is that if it is a trend, you know, then it becomes an opportunity to do something and culturally kind of meaningful things within that. So I think we should kind of embrace the fact that this opportunity exists for events to be made within that space. But just to come back briefly, I think a large part of why I've really enjoyed my time at this year at festivals, and I don't feel in any way fatigued, is basically I haven't been to as many, which is, and also like this is only the 3rd festival I've attended this year of the 14 where I've been invited specifically as a member of the press. So I went to Graz and Diagonale and Berlinale, and so
Diagonale is the Austrian National Festival.
That's right, and so I haven't been under the same kinds of pressures to, you know, make ends meet, you know, pitching unresponsive editors from locales that they haven't heard of about festivals that they don't care about, which is, you know, an increasing source of frustration for many freelance film
films
critics.
that they'll never see.
Absolutely, and also like, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but why should people read about films if they are never going to get a chance to see them?
Well, you know? they do get chances to see them because many of the films that you'll see here will be available through some online platform or other. And there are ways of, yes, it would be great if films that play at these sorts of festivals went to every big city, but, you know, and that's the best way to see them, obviously. Yeah. But, you know, if people make the effort, they can find these films normally somehow. So, you know, and still there are probably fewer films being made now for financial reasons, but there's still a disorientingly vast
I just think there's a frustrating pressure on critics to be like almost like travel guides, like, you know, reporting back from a festival about a bunch of films that, you know, no one really gives a crap about, basically, for many different reasons. And I think a large part of the reason why they don't give a crap about them is because they have no means to see them. I mean, I know, you know, we're speaking to the converted here, because like, if we want to see a film, if we're interested by it, we find means by which to see it, but we're not representative of that greater demographic, right? No. But on the other hand, like, I'm kind of increasingly comfortable with the niche within which critics work, and so, like, you know, I think sometimes we kind of bend over backwards to validate our profession as something of like cultural significance, and of course it is, but like,
and you mean it has to have like a direct impact? It's like, I write about this film, therefore it gets picked up, or it gets talked about.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
which can happen.
Yeah, of course it can, but like less and less, I think. Even though the same pressures exist in the same kind of.
So what's pushing against it? What is the negative pressure that, you know? I recommend a film, I talk about it, I want people to see it. What are the pressures that stop that? Is it like lazy or unimaginative or otherwise dysfunctional distributors, exhibitors who just don't want to look
Well,
outside the box.
I think it can kind of impede upon the actual reflexive process of being a critic, because you're entering and approaching a film with a specific frame of mind that is like on the active lookout for the next best thing, or the next worst thing usually, and so it kind of, I don't know, it seems to sort of block the critical process and thought process of that, and it turns criticism into some sort of advertising thing, I guess.
Advertising for the critic and for the film.
Yes, and so it becomes this like self-aggrandizing thing, inevitably, despite the best wishes of the critic sometimes,
But how else are worthwhile films going to get wider exposure? Because like if you go to 12 or 20 or 25 festivals in a year, and you see 300, 400, 500 films, by the nature of that, you will kind of see loads of good ones and loads of bad ones, and you can make that comparison. But it then falls to that critic to, I mean, I think if you're not championing the ones that you really like, I mean, of course, if you're doing it for craven motives and you're doing it for, self-aggrandizement, and who knows, maybe some of us do that.
Yeah.
But there will be genuine enthusiasm. There will be films that you feel deserve to get the spotlight, and because you pick up the newspaper and all you read about is Call Me By Your Name, or Lady Bird, or the latest other American independent, or made by.
And it can be
companies.
difficult when you're watching so many films over the course of a time, because the criticism has a use value, I guess, whereby you're only watching that film in order to then write about it, and then the next week it's forgotten, and it can be very difficult to sustain an energy for a particular film or anything like that.
Yeah, but I've been writing and tweeting and boring people to death about Chappie for 2 years.
I knew you were going to mention Chappie. Jesus,
we're
we're talking about Porto PostDoc. How did we get to Chappie? Jeez.
But there are certain friends of mine who say I'm not allowed to talk about Chappie anymore. But it's like, I'm
going to be one of them.
I've been very consistent in it has had an impact, and people do watch that film because they're so sick of me going on about it. And not all of them like it, but most of them do. And it's like, there are certain films that I pick up on, like this year, Araby, the Brazilian film,
but
which I will hammer that nail until...
But you risk, as you said, boring people, and also kind of, you can almost fall in love with being validated by your own perverse interests and tastes.
But you can only validate if others appreciate the film.
No, because sometimes that's what I mean. That's the perverse thing, that you're validated by the fact that nobody does agree with you, and so you become known as that.
No, I mean, I think
the Chappie guy.
To take Chappie and Araby as two examples, if I was recommending Chappie to non-critics, non-cinephiles, and they're all turned around going, "This film's horrible. Why on earth are you recommending this film?"
Which is the do.
One or two of them are. Or Araby, which is a completely different, very kind of serious political. Artistic film in many ways, but that film just won the top prize in the festival in Oslo, and people who've seen it have emotional reactions, and it was in Vienna and things like that. And if most people that I recommended those films to were turn around and going, you know nothing about cinema, don't recommend any more films, then obviously I would stop doing it, or I would. And there are other films that I love that I know that everybody else is going to hate.
I mean, it's also criticism's not just one thing. To be a critic isn't just to do one thing or serve a single purpose, which is why I love it, which is why I'm drawn to it in the first place. It's that, but it's also I'm interested in criticism because I like to just write, and so I'm less and less interested in convincing people who aren't convinced of something. I think we have trouble as it is convincing people of the validity of our profession and craft, basically, and that's only going to get worse as less and less people pay us. But, what?
Well, or it could be that because fewer and fewer people are getting paid, the ones who keep doing it are the ones who are doing it for other reasons. The kind of fools who don't mind starving in garrets, and if they can crank out that 50 words or 500 words on that film that they love, and others will just go off to other professions. So there will be a thinning out. But to get back to Porto PostDoc, are there any of the new films you've seen here, apart from the Brazilian film, that would then inspire you to either write about that film or to be evangelical about that film?
I mean, evangelical, no, but there's very few films each year that I do feel like that, and that's fine. I'm fine with that. I don't need to like absolutely fall in love with movies. The process of finding a film merely okay, I love that, you know, in itself. I mean, I like Lida, the Eborn film here.
Which is about it's a little bit complicated. She's Swedish.
It's weird because all the films I've liked here I can't synopsize.
But it's basically about this old lady in her 80s or maybe even 90s.
In Crimea.
In Crimea, but she's originally Swedish. She's basically kind of been a bit of a pawn of history that got invaded, and the Germans came and then the Russians came, and then she went back to Sweden, and then she had to go back to it. And now she's in basically an old people's home in Crimea, in the Ukraine, and it's kind of a portrait of her, but kind of from different angles.
It is, yeah.
I mean, again, in some ways, straightforward documentary. You see her, you know, she's talking about her life, and you see her going around. But then there are these kind of recreated inserts, which kind of they don't exactly sort of pretend to be her life or her memories, but they're kind of giving her. Extending out, so rather just being a portrait of a person in the play.
I mean, I didn't find any of the films this week particularly robust in terms of their structural or aesthetic components. There's some emergency going on there.
Cops disagree with me.
Sorry.
You mean like formally you didn't find them?
Yeah, I mean like they've kind of all a bit been they've all been kind of a bit all over the place. And similar to the festival, a bit freewheeling in spirit, and like in every single one of them, I've liked some qualities. I've also found my mind drifting somewhat during them, and my attention fluctuating, which I guess I was fine with this week. If I attended the Berlinale and that happened to every single screening, I would, by the end of the festival, be a bit disappointed and annoyed. But I don't know if that's...
I think with Lida you get more of a sense of a structure than you do in a film like, for instance, Tierra, Sola, Isolated Land by Tiziana, which is about Easter Island and the various ethnographic approaches that filmmakers have taken, and the one that she takes.
My frustration with that film, and I found myself very fidgety in Tierra, Sola, was that it couldn't really decide what it wanted to do. Like, there seemed to be 3 different films in it, and I think if you're going to make an ethnographic film, you either make one or you don't. You don't make a film in which you ruminate about the ethics of making an ethnographic film, because at several points it tries to define what an ethnographic film is. It makes a point of giving a different definition each time, and it does so in these weird on-screen textual inscriptions rather than a voiceover.
Which is a very trendy
thing. It is. I guess it's like post-marker, right? So it's ruminative on the one hand, but you're not getting the disembodied verbalized voice, and the other is just like this text. And I'm like, well, whose words are these? And another thing specifically frustrating about that strategy was that it comes up in half sentences at a time, and so like by the time you get to like the end of that, you know, aphoristic, epigrammatic rumination, I forgot how it started.
Which is actually exactly what happens in another film that's here called Spell Reel by Philippe César.
Which I didn't see.
Yeah, which I saw a couple of weeks ago in Montreal, and it's like, this one's about Guinea-Bissau in Africa, Portuguese colony. A cache of old films is discovered which kind of basically chronicle its independence struggle and guerrilla fighting and stuff like that. And so it's an interrogation of what those films now mean and what they meant then and things like this. And this one, Tierra Sola, is about ethnographic films made on Easter Island and what they may mean with text on the screen, and you put the two of them together and it's like, you know, it's a perfect double bill, but both, to me, neither film is satisfactory. And I was just wondering whether they're going back to this old Manny Farber idea of termite art, whereby the fact that it's inconclusive, the fact that it doesn't quite hang together, there's no great thesis. It's like you discover what the film is while you're making it, and then you show it.
It's about the process and the positionality rather than actual conclusions.
Which to me is like, it's getting away from what I think of as cinema. I mean, again, maybe it's just because I'm stuck in my ways and old-fashioned and I need certain things to happen.
But you're not arguing against like ambiguity in art, though.
No, I'm not. I'm saying it's just that there's obviously a lot of these films being made at the moment by people who are getting the money to make them and getting the time to make them and are getting selected by festivals. And like Spell Reel's been in loads of festivals, had very, you know, Leo Goldsmith, who's here, thinks it's an excellent film. And it's like, I just watch these films and I'm going, it's not that they're terrible, it's just that there's something here that I'm just not getting.
Lacking.
And,
Yeah.
and it could be that it's me that, as I say, I'm not on the wavelength of these filmmakers because they've got their feelers out into different art forms and installation, and I don't know, like it's just something that it's not my wheelhouse, because I'm basically watch films and, you know, I read books and stuff like that, but I'm a film watcher, and like maybe these films are kind of moving towards other disciplines, other media, which I just don't know the vocabulary of.
Like, I don't know if a lot of, to the extent to which these are outcomes of practice-based research and academic institutionalized filmmaking, but they do seem to me very much the outcome of that, whereby, you know, everything is, the emphasis rather is upon process and development rather than actual, and also social impact, right? So some kind of cultural relevance beyond the existence of the actual film.
Yeah, because like it's, you know, I'm fascinated by, you know, Guinea-Bissau, the history of that country in Africa, not well known.
Yeah.
Easter Island, everybody knows the statues, but you know, there's loads of stuff that we don't know, and it's actually a very interesting snapshot of colonial attitudes, and it was ruled by Chile and stuff like this. But again, I just felt as though they take this fascinating stuff, which I'm not saying you've got to make a traditional, you know, this is what happened on Easter Island sort of thing, but it's just like, it's kind of, it makes a virtue of its elusiveness, and I think if you fill that gaps with your own interest, then it can be this wonderful, stimulating experience. But I come out of it, I feel as though I've eaten kind of half a meal.
It's weird because, like, we watched one of the repertory screenings today, Peter Mettler's Picture of Light, which was made in 1994, I think, which is a film about a town in very, very north Canada.
Churchill, Manitoba.
Yeah, and the pursuit of a film crew, or some kind of crew, in pursuit of recording the Northern Lights.
No, it's a film crew, you see.
And but Peter Mettler's like recording them, and so the film we're watching is a film about a film that we don't see, and it's actually, it anticipates, I thought, that kind of ruminative structure of these kinds of experimental films, but I didn't find it at all frustrating. I found it very, very beautiful, and I think a large part of that is the strength of the
Northern Lights.
The strength of the Northern Lights, but also the strength of Mettler's own voiceover, and you know, it's not overwritten, it's very poetic, it's operating within that kind of what's become very trendy, but it's the right side of Marker-esque voiceover for me. Did you like?
But yeah, not as much as you. I mean, it is linear. It's like at the beginning, it's like we're going to go to the Arctic. Yeah. They go to the Arctic. They get snowed in. They have to pass the time. It's really weird. I mean, it reminded me of The Thing. You know, it's like these people are in this.
A rifle shows up at one point.
Yeah, this like Arctic place, and they're all kind of insane. Yeah. It's like hovering on the edge. You imagine, you know, Herzoggy and stuff going on here, and they're all like eccentrics and oddballs, and like Mettler loves the fact that they have these great faces and voices and stuff like that. But so then you have the line, and then you do see what you do see some of the footage in there. So it is, in some ways, a conventional documentary, but it's kind of. It is reaching out, and he doesn't know what he's going to get when he gets there, because you know, part of it is like a comedy about these bumbling people falling over in the snow. I don't know. I wasn't as huge. I just didn't like the way he spoke. I think if you're going to listen to somebody speak that long, I mean, one of your favourite films of last year, Jenny Olsen's The Royal Road. Yeah. I mean, I don't care what that film's about. She's got such a fantastic voice. I would listen to her talking about, you know. Her sock drawer, or I don't know, or the Leighton Orient's, you know, defence problems. 90 minutes of that voice I just listened to, but Mettler's voice again is just.
See, I didn't mind it. That's just a preference thing, right? I didn't mind it.
And the other repertory kind of focus or highlight. There was two films by Miroslav Janek, Czech documentarian. I would say fairly. Traditional documentarian, observational, but also a little bit participatory. The film 2 days ago was The Unseen, which is about a school for blind children, and they are taking photographs as part of their education or part of their life. And then the one today, which was Hamza I Am, which was about another group of blind children who are, a lot of them are studying music. And I didn't know much about this chap, Miroslav Janek, my loss, because obviously he's talented and interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm very glad that but you know, to show two films by this chap, and he's here and he's little bit bemused by this, and it's like, it's not really a retrospective. But The Unseen was the best film I've seen here this week, and the one today, unfortunately, it was meant to be shown on 35mm. There was a projection issue. It ended up being shown on not very good digital, but the film exists. What was your...
It's almost what happens when you don't train your projectionist.
What was your Janek takeaway?
I liked it. I mean, I liked both films. I preferred The Unseen. I found The Unseen...
Oh, this is an image, by the way. But
yeah, this is one of the images by one of the blind children who are the subjects in that film.
You see better on this.
So it connects very well.
It looks better in landscape.
Landscape,
so,
yeah.
But yeah, he said, "Oh, I'm very happy that they've used this picture."
Shall we do the rest of the video? No, I liked it. I like them both. You know, that it has a structural robustness to it, and I think it helps that it's only like, I think it's less than an hour, The Unseen, or just an hour. And so it never really outstays its welcome. It's very much in an observational mode. It's very funny. Pardon me. And I found it particularly refreshing because we'd just seen earlier that day Childhood, or the day before, which is one of the new films in this film.
This is by Margaret Olin,
it's in a sidebar.
Filmmaker, in a sidebar of films about children, I think. Again,
not necessarily
like
for children,
but like three or four films. And this is about a very lovely, charming Norwegian kindergarten where all the children are very happy and they're looked after very well by wonderful people. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was like, I found it very, very frustrating watching this film, that it didn't really seem to offer any new insights into, you know, what kids get up to at school. And you know, there's been numerous films made about that kind of subject matter in this vein as well. It doesn't really have a structure to it. I think it takes for granted how interesting kids are on camera, and you know, they're inherently interesting subjects, right? Because they're fascinating in their minds. You know, they don't cognitize in the same way adults do. They have no filter.
It says at the beginning of the film, you know, it's like play is very important. So they're not really taught anything. I mean, it's just basically they have the chance to, because they're in some beautiful Norwegian forest that you don't see butterflies or whatever it is, and they can just like wander around and talk and do whatever they want to do. Which a little bit of that went a long way for me. My favourite film of last year was Miss Keats' Children, the Dutch documentary, which was 2 hours in a Dutch reception class. Basically, a lot of the children are from migrant or refugee backgrounds. And some of these kids are like horrible. I mean, it's like bullying and just kids being nasty to each other and stuff like that. Camera always at the height of the children, and like that could have been 6 hours.
This film doesn't play with any. It doesn't test its aesthetic sensibilities. It doesn't play with duration at all. It's just a bunch of material just thrown together.
I mean, if it was like a short of 20 minutes or something, but then it wouldn't get programmed.
Because it's neither here nor there. But like The Unseen, I thought was also very much thrown together, but and yet it had an energy.
But also the thing with that is he's part of the filmmaking, and all the way through the kids are talking to him, Mirek, and like he's true. You know, he's like one of the main characters in the film, and he's like a funny, interesting.
One of them refers to him as Dad at one point.
Yeah, one of them calls him Dad. We should have asked him about this in the Q&A, and maybe this is why he's done these films about the blind children. Yeah. But like in Childhood, fantastic title. It's one of these where let's just pretend the camera isn't there, and occasionally the kids.
But then you know, it cheats. It does that like thing. I always think, you know, in Come Dine With Me, the reality TV show in the UK, in which 4 strangers take turns at hosting the other 3 to cook for them and all that. And like, there's a knock on the door, and we see the scene from outside. And then they've obviously done 2 takes, because then there's a camera miraculously in the interior of the house ready for the reverse shot. And there's scenes in this film where, you know, there's reverse shots, and it's like, well, I don't need a film to have any sort of integrity or authenticity as non-fiction or documentary, right? I don't really care about that kind of thing.
You know,
yeah, but I mean, Wiseman uses like 3 different cameras in the same room. Obviously, this isn't made with that kind of thing in mind. But it takes me out of it, you know. There's not, you know, as you said, like Miroslav Janek is part of the.
I mean, the process. Is part of the film.
Yeah. That's
and that film was made some years ago. I mean, it's quite an old film, but yeah, I was just watching some films from ITFA and documentary festivals, and it's amazing how many this fly on the wall conceit. And to me, it just feels really like old fashioned. It's like people are still making.
I mean, there's a
process.
People
are going to bed. and the cameraman's like standing there, and then I think, oh, I'm going to bed now. You know, it's like, and then the cameraman like zooms in. And
I mean, like, you know, if you're gonna, I can imagine that it lends itself to a fascinating academic thesis as well, because it's all about process and the, you know, the rationale behind certain aesthetic decisions. But like, you know, you watch a compelling short like Mark Chapman's Camrex last year, right, which is very much in that mode, but there's a robustness and there's a self-interrogative quality there. That's embedded into the film itself and to its very texture, in fact.
And in that one,
does creative things as well.
All the cameras never acknowledge.
Yeah, and but there's a disembodied, like, so we get like voiceovers, I guess, but they're more like testimonials, you know, in the way that the methodological approach of that,
it's easy for you,
you know, is that's my method. It's structured into the film, right? And in that, I got nothing from that childhood. But you know,
but then the very next film we saw, wasn't it? Or it was like
the Unseen, which was why I found it kind of so refreshing. I was like, that's how you do film.
But in a way, it's like, on the one hand, it's fantastic that festivals like this mix older and new films, and it gives you a chance to put things in context. But if you come away from it saying, which films did you like at the festival, you go, oh well, Miroslav's Janek's The Unseen and Peter Mettler's this. It's like, you know, the new films, if you put them next to like films by the masters, it's like, you know, you've really got to be on your game. And just stick something like Childhood in, you can watch it and think, well, that's a perfectly nice film. Then 2 hours later, you watch The Unseen and you kind of go, But I don't know whether that shows that documentary is dead or dying, or.
But I love that what you've just referred to, though, how festivals take time to allow these kinds of historical periods, otherwise disconnected, to have that, share that curated space, and then we can find continuities, etc.
Yeah, and a little bit of randomness, and not everything has to be put into rigid, like, you know, formalised.
But if you're sitting down for 2 to 3 films a day consecutively as well, because they're bunched together, because as we said earlier, film screenings don't begin until 2:30 in effect, and it has Jean Rouge stuff here, but sadly it wasn't subtitled. Like, that's up to us then to find those through lines, and you know, and I'm more and more kind of interested in those kind of random, unexpected connections that we bring up, because of, you know, our mind is still in some kind of space.
And this is Portugal, and all the screenings are running like start ridiculously late.
Yeah, but
so
you know,
your mind does
fine.
have your mind does have plenty of time to drift on that. Speaking of things running ridiculously
have we
late
gone
in
over?
Portugal, we are coming to the end of our very tightly modulated slot that we're given at this festival. So you'll return in a future festival?
Hopefully, yeah, I would love to. And my one regret this week actually is that I haven't really seen much of the city. You know, we didn't do one of our purposeful walks downriver, because they have a beautiful bunch of bridges on this river and in this city, and the city in general is just like, it's fascinating. You can see why somebody like, you know, Gabe Klinger was drawn to make a feature film here.
To immortalise it
on celluloid as well.
Immortalise it on celluloid in a film which plays with documentary and fictional elements in a way which all films now have to do. So yeah, I'd be happy to come back, maybe for like, this was a 4-night stay. I think we need at least, for a city like Porto, which reminds me of my own city, Sunderland, back home, big city on a river. No, if Sunderland had never been bombed and never had Margaret Thatcher,
well, if history hadn't happened,
Sunderland would be having its own experimental boundary-pushing documentary
directed by you,
and we wouldn't have to come to Portugal. But we're here now. It's great to be here.
Indeed.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Cheers.